The dead can't speak. But sometimes they leave behind something that does. In the darkest corners of unsolved cases, it's not always new evidence that turns the tide. Sometimes it's the words of the silenced, waiting to be found. And when those words were finally read, they didn't just reopen a case, they blew it wide open. 2 months after the discovery of Caitlin Driscoll's remains behind the abandoned motel in Vermont, authorities continued combing through everything left behind by Mark Randall: boxes, storage units, and even mail forwarded to old aliases. In a rusted locker inside a converted garage in Youngstown, Ohio, a cardboard box labeled "Journals, Work" was found. But these weren't work logs. They were the personal writings of Mark Randall, going back nearly 20 years. Each entry was dated, detailed, and horrifying. In chilling, casual handwriting, Randall described his manipulations, the children he rescued, and how he decided who would live and who wouldn't. But one name kept appearing, more than any other: Lena. Lena doesn't cry anymore. She's almost ready. Lena asked about her mother again. Had to remind her what we agreed. The FBI believed Lena was another victim. Possibly the youngest, and possibly still missing. Then came the real twist, an address scribbled inside the back cover: Haverhill, Massachusetts. That night, federal agents descended on a farmhouse outside Haverhill. And inside, they found her. Lena, now 17, was living under a fake name. She'd been homeschooled, isolated, and told for years that Randall was her only family. But Lena wasn't just another victim. She had learned to survive. Hidden under her mattress was a notebook. Written in secret over the years, it contained names, locations, and patterns Randall had repeated across states. Names the FBI hadn't even uncovered. With Lena's journal and Mark's writings, the case transformed overnight. What had started as one tragic family murder was now officially classified as a multi-state serial predator investigation. And Lena? She chose to testify. In a closed courtroom, Lena faced the families of Caitlin, Mariah, and 3 other children confirmed through DNA as Randall's victims. With calm clarity, she read aloud from her journal. The room fell silent. Even hardened investigators wept as she recounted how Mark made her forget her real name, rewrite her past, and erase her pain with promises that were never kept. But Lena remembered one thing. He told me that monsters protect you from worse ones. I believed him, until I met the truth. Thanks to Lena's testimony and evidence, prosecutors linked Randall to 2 additional cold cases. In the eyes of the law, the record was now complete. And for many families, justice had finally come. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens and courtrooms. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing the face of a girl no one was looking for, a survivor who was never supposed to be found. Lena didn't just remember. She documented. She resisted. And she exposed the very man who tried to erase her. Survival, she said, is remembering who you were even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. In a world where silence often buries the truth, Lena's voice reminded us all. Memory is power. And silence is never safety. But just when investigators thought the full scope of Randall's crimes had been uncovered, an anonymous letter arrived at the FBI field office in Burlington, Vermont. Type: no return address. Inside, just one sentence: you've only scratched the surface. Mark wasn't working alone. And attached, a photo, taken in 1999. 3 children. One of them was Lena. But the man holding her hand? The photo came in an unmarked envelope. 3 children. A park bench. Late 90s. One was Lena. The other 2, still unidentified. But what made this photo explosive was the man standing behind them. Not Mark Randall. This man was older, clean-cut, wearing a postal uniform. The letter inside read, "He taught Mark everything." That's when the FBI realized they hadn't caught the beginning of this nightmare, only the middle. A forensic scan of the photo dated it to 1999, somewhere in northern Maine. The man's face was partially turned, but facial recognition software got a 72% match. James Elroy Benton. Former postal worker. Honorably discharged Air Force vet. and Mark Randall's foster father from 1973 to 1976. It explained a lot. Randall had once written in his journal, "He showed me what silence can do." Until now, no one knew what that meant. Now they did. When agents arrived at Benton's home, an isolated cabin in Aroostook County, Maine, he was already gone. Inside, however, was something far more disturbing than they expected. The basement was clean, sterile, and behind a fake wall, a soundproofed room with a child's mattress and restraints bolted into the floor. They also found photographs, dozens of them, dating back to the 80s. Many of the children in those photos were never reported missing. They were foster kids, runaways, invisible to the system. And James Benton had been collecting them. When Lena was shown the photo, her hands trembled. He called himself Grandpa Jim. She remembered his voice, how he always whistled, how he called Randall boy and gave him rules. She remembered being left alone with him once, and never telling Mark what happened. But now she was ready to speak. With FBI profilers and a trauma specialist, Lena described how Mark wasn't the architect, he was the apprentice. It was Benton who taught him how to groom, isolate, and erase. Mark was just a continuation. The real predator had always been one step behind the headlines. Until now. With Lena's help and Benton's photos, authorities reopened 8 forgotten cases involving foster children who'd gone missing between 1985 and 2002. Some had been written off. Others, simply never investigated. The FBI now believes Benton was responsible for the training and grooming of at least 3 men, one of whom was Mark Randall. Lena once again became the voice for the voiceless. At a press briefing she said, "I survived one monster. Now I'll help stop the one who created him." Her strength turned grief into justice. Her memory, into evidence. Sometimes the scariest part of evil is not when it hides. It's when it teaches others to hide in plain sight. James Benton wasn't just a killer. He was a blueprint for silence, secrecy, and systemic failure. He counted on his victims to remain invisible. But they didn't. Because survivors like Lena don't disappear. They become louder, braver, sharper. "You may bury the truth," Lena said, "but we will keep digging." But 3 days ago, a 911 call came in from a motel in Bangor, Maine. A young girl, disoriented, alone, and malnourished, said she escaped from a man named Jim. She said he talked about Lena. When officers arrived, the room was empty. The girl was gone. But on the mirror, written in lipstick, "She remembers too much." On a cold January night in Bangor, Maine 911 dispatch received a chilling call. A young girl, estimated to be 10 or 11, claimed she had escaped a bad man. Her voice was hoarse. She gave a room number, 12, at a rundown roadside motel. She called him Jim. By the time officers arrived, the room was empty. No girl. No suspect. But on the mirror, scrawled in smeared lipstick, "She remembers too much." A red flag for investigators. A threat for Lena. And the start of a manhunt more urgent than anything they'd faced before. Inside the motel room they found subtle clues. A child's sock, a juice box, and an old Polaroid camera wiped clean of prints. But under the bed was what unraveled everything. A torn page from a children's book. Written on the back in a child's shaky handwriting. "He says I'm like the others." He has pictures of a girl named Lena. The page was bagged and rushed to FBI labs. DNA confirmed what they feared. The girl was real. And she was in immediate danger. When Lena was informed of the girl's disappearance, she made a decision that changed everything. She demanded to be part of the investigation, not just as a witness but as a voice. Against FBI counsel, she released a public statement. "If she's still alive, she's waiting for someone to come back. I know what that feels like. And I'm not waiting anymore." That moment sparked a movement. Thousands shared Lena's video. Cold case pages posted side-by-side photos of Randall and Benton. And in a small Facebook group for foster care survivors, a name surfaced. Emily Sue. A girl who vanished from a group home in Massachusetts 6 months ago. The photo? Matched the girl from the motel mirror. Now fully reactivated, the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment CARD team tracked movements linked to James Benton's last known alias, Earl J. Hennigan. Credit card activity at a gas station in Presque Isle, Maine placed him less than 40 miles from the motel, just 3 hours before the 911 call. Security footage showed a man with a baseball cap and aviators. Standing next to him, a girl with a limp. Investigators were closing in. But Benton knew how to vanish. He'd done it before. And he had help. Because in the trunk of that same gas station footage car, they spotted something haunting. A child's drawing. A stick figure with an X for a mouth. And beside it, the name Lena, written in red crayon. For Lena, this wasn't just a case. It was personal. She'd been the girl in the car. She'd been the child with no voice. Now she became the only one who could outthink Benton, because she knew the rules he played by. With FBI profilers, Lena mapped his likely destinations: abandoned homes, forgotten foster sites, isolated roads she remembered from her early years. And on February 14, 2025, Valentine's Day, authorities found the break they needed. A car. Empty. Idling in a wooded area outside Millinocket, Maine. Inside, a map with 5 red dots. And a final note taped to the dash. One left to silence. This story began with silence. With bodies buried under concrete and voices erased before they could cry out. But it's now carried by the ones who survived. By a girl who grew up in captivity and chose to speak. And now, perhaps, by a girl still waiting to be found. Monsters hide in basements, Lena once said. But they die when the doors are opened. Truth doesn't just solve crimes. It prevents the next one. As of tonight, the FBI believes James Benton is still alive, and still holding Emily Sue. But now they're not just chasing a man. They're chasing a network. In a digital folder recovered from Benton's old laptop, analysts found encrypted emails. Communications with 2 other names linked to Child Protection Services in the 1990s. Both men are still active. And one of them was just promoted to a state-level child welfare role. This isn't over. And the basement might just be the beginning. When FBI analysts decrypted the email cache recovered from James Benton's laptop, they expected scattered correspondence, maybe dark web contacts or off-grid travel logs. Instead, they found names: government employees, case managers, foster care contractors. And 2 stood out. Douglas Vann, retired CPS investigator from Massachusetts. Raymond Kessler, active regional director of Child and Family Services in New Hampshire. Each email was coded but consistent. Phrases like suitable transfers, unrecorded placements, and quiet files appeared repeatedly. But the most chilling subject line? Lena was never on the books. With Lena's help, the FBI cross-referenced names from Randall's and Benton's past foster care records. Over 60 files were missing or incomplete. Nearly half the children listed were never officially placed in state care. That means one thing: they vanished inside the system itself. Investigators now believed that Randall and Benton weren't working alone. They were part of a loose, hidden network of child traffickers, embedded within the very institutions meant to protect children. The system had cracks, and these men knew exactly where they were. On March 11, 2025, Lena Randall testified before a closed-door Senate subcommittee. What she revealed sent shockwaves through the justice and child welfare communities. She described the day she was transferred into Benton's hands. They told me I was being adopted. But there was no paperwork. No goodbye. Just a man in a uniform who took my hand and said, "No more noise now." Her words echoed down the halls of Capitol Hill. And for the first time, the system was forced to look inward. Behind closed doors, a federal investigation, Operation Hollow House, was launched. The focus? Douglas Vann and Raymond Kessler. 6 weeks into the investigation, a storage unit rented under an alias tied to Vann was uncovered. Inside were 14 locked file cabinets, dozens of forged foster transfer documents, a list of approved couriers, one of whom was James Benton. Among the files was a folder labeled, "Emily Sue, priority. Do not register." The girl from the motel? She had never officially entered foster care. She had been removed from her home after a false CPS report, signed by Raymond Kessler. The predator wasn't just in the system. He was designing it. On April 17, the FBI raided Kessler's home. He was arrested on charges of conspiracy, trafficking, and obstruction of justice. And in his home office, behind a false wall, agents found photos, hand-drawn maps, and a series of audio tapes, interviews with children whose names didn't appear in any state record. Among the tapes, Emily Sue, whispering, crying, saying one name over and over again, Lena, with paperwork that never gets filed, with children who disappear not into the woods but into the cracks of policy. Lena survived the monster in the basement, but she also brought down the ones hiding in boardrooms. You can rebuild a house, she said, but not if the rot is in the foundation. And thanks to her, the foundation is finally being ripped open. Emily Sue's voice was found, but her location remains unknown. The last file in Kessler's records was dated just 2 weeks ago, titled, Transfer Complete. New handler secured. No name, no address, just coordinates. And they lead to a compound in rural West Virginia, off-grid, unregistered, and heavily secured. FBI teams are preparing to breach, but what they find there may uncover the final chapter of this story, or the beginning of something far worse.